I am thrilled to be here with this group of incredible women who are shaping the future of business with the smart decisions they're making about innovation. So as we saw in the video, technology is really forcing businesses to change or risk being left behind. And I think that's especially true in the businesses that are very consumer focused that each of you runs. But you can't embrace every new thing that comes along as much as you'd like to. So I thought we'd start by discussing how do you evaluate advances, new services, technologies like AI, how do you evaluate them and make decisions about which ones are must-do and which ones you can take a pass on? Debbie, let's start with you.
Sure. That's a great question. Especially these days, it feels like a water hose of technological advancement. And that quote we just heard, right? If you don't embrace it, you don't adopt it, you might be left behind. So that's very much the ethos that I think many of us on the stage feel. We evaluate it in a lot of different ways, but I think we first view at OpenTable, we're here to serve restaurants. We're here to help them run their businesses more productively, more efficiently, right? And we just heard about the importance of community. And think about restaurants' roles in all of our communities. So when we evaluate things like technology, it's like, okay, well, first and foremost, does adopting this help them? Does it get them their questions answered faster, right, with our customer support agents? Does it help them do menial or manual tasks faster so they can focus on the guest? So I feel like the way we evaluate is, what are our North Stars as a business? Does adopting this piece of technology and this part of our product help our restaurants? And then you mentioned the consumer-facing side. Obviously, I hope everyone in this room has heard of OpenTable and uses us frequently. But it's also what helps consumers, right? We have a wealth of information on all of your dining behavior, right? And in this day and age with AI, we can be processing that information. We can make it more personal. So when you open up OpenTable, they know that I'm a mother of 2 kids who are very rambunctious. So, like we need a corner table, or, they love pasta, for example, right? Like, so there's so many exciting things happening. And I think the way that we decide what to deploy, what to invest in is it helping our restaurants and is it helping our diners?
I would just add one thing to that. So we operate a lot of online travel companies. And when this technology, burst onto the scenes, we went running and said, we need to build a product for our customers right now. And so we did that. And then what we noticed was the adoption wasn't high. So what our customers were actually telling us was, the product that you have is good. Thanks for offering me this Gen AI tool, but I don't like that one as much. So that was a really interesting learning for us, that we said, okay, it's not tech for the sake of tech, right? It's what is valuable, to your points. And so one of the things we learned quickly was that in customer service of any kind, the agents have to take summaries of what they're writing, and that takes time. So we deployed Gen AI to write the summaries for them, and it cut the customer service time in, I think, a fraction. So that's just an example of a learning that you really have to look at your business. You have to look at your customers, who you're serving, your partners, and to say, is this going to add value? Not because you think that they're going to want something that you should build.
I want to come back to that point, but
yeah, I'm a technologist. I've been in the tech industry, I think, for 3 decades, and so I think this is always with technology. There's a life cycle. There's an early stage where everyone's fascinated. In the tech lingo, it's called the hype cycle. People are like talking about it. Everyone wants to try it, but there's risk at that early stages, and then the technology matures, and then it becomes really useful. I think so. Your question about how do you, as a business, evaluate? I think the timing is the very, very important thing. In addition to picking which technology is right for your business, you have to ask yourself, when is the right time? If you're in the kind of a business where applying the technology is beneficial for you and you're okay with taking the risk, then you should be an early adopter because the impact is higher. If you're not, then it's okay to be a fast follower. Everyone doesn't have to jump on the bandwagon of a particular emerging technology right away. And there are many companies that are actually fast followers that actually benefit from a business perspective. So I think one of the most important factors in judging when a technology should be adopted inside of your business is the timing for that. With AI right now, I feel it is going through a little bit of a hype cycle. Everyone's talking about it. Everyone's excited about it. The reason is the rate of change and the rate of progress is so fast, and it's such a powerful technology. But the flip side of it, it brings with it a lot of risks, right? I think broadly, though, I would say, particularly with AI, I think your question broadly was about technology. But with AI, we should distinguish between AI and Gen AI. They're very different things. I think one is much more mature and the other is not so much. Gen AI uses data to create content, create text, create videos, create music. And so it does have built into it a lot of biases. And so unless the models are trained in content that's culturally sensitive and literate, it brings those biases as it creates the content. So I think we should be careful about adopting those sorts of things in consumer-facing businesses, but also B2B businesses, because at the end of the day, there's a customer who's receiving our services, right? So I think timing and maturity are two critical factors that everyone should take into account.
Okay, let's do a quick check here. How many people have booked a restaurant on OpenTable? Show of hands. All
This
right.
warms my heart. Thank you. Thank you. This is the best moment of my day. Thank you.
And planned a trip on Booking.com. All right. And I can guarantee you that probably everyone here in this room shared a story during breakfast with your neighbor at your table. So I think that's a testament that the decisions you're making are on the right track. But I do want to come back to something you mentioned, Leslie, which was this idea, and Padma, about timing, right? And I found it interesting that you said when you offered the AI-based, because it's 2025, we have to talk about AI, when you offered the AI-based services, which you would think for something like travel, which is very data heavy, right? You could easily kind of help people figure out, plug in their likes and get an algorithm that will pump out where they would, be most comfortable. Tell me about why you think you saw that people were sort of reluctant to pick that up initially.
I think in general, consumer adoption, if something works today, you don't necessarily need to change that. If the way you shop today works for you, you don't have to change that. So I think for a lot of travelers, there's a comfort pattern in how they book travel today. And I think the opportunities in the future will be immense, but to be honest, the technology is not there yet. So you need to integrate. We are not the company that's probably going to build our own LLM. So we're going to have to work with partners. You have data privacy considerations. We're a global company. You have different regulations of this technology all over the world, different technology bases. So there's a lot that will have to go into it. How and where we share our customer data is something we take very seriously. So there are so many elements that I think the potential for this to be there is game-changing, but we're not there yet. And I think consumers look at it and say, okay, that's not there. So we have to sort of keep iterating and building on it. But I will also say, I think we're at an interesting moment in time, sort of the DeepSeek moment, when we realize that maybe this technology can be more accessible than we thought it was in the beginning with just the billion-dollar tech players that can afford to do this. So I think we're going to start to see this layer of entrepreneurs and innovators building applications on top of these big technology platforms. And I think that's really going to accelerate the innovation and make those consumer products better. If you think about it, for example, Uber couldn't exist until Apple built the iPhone. So I think we're in one of those moments. And when that cycle starts to happen, I think we'll start to see that innovation make the products a lot better.
Okay. And that was one of the surprises for you at Booking. Debbie, when you were embracing and adopting AI, were there surprises, negative or positive, that came to light as you were bringing that technology into OpenTable?
Yeah, and we're very much in that process still, but just quickly on Leslie's point, the AI alternative has to be better, right? You have to, like on the travel side, you have your way of booking travel. You do your research, you figure out, everyone I'm sure in this room has their way of doing it. So you have to trust that the AI is gonna do it better than you and gonna tell you how they're doing it. And right now I don't think we're there yet. I think we're gonna get there really, really soon. On the OpenTable side, we've done a lot on customer service, for example, making our customer service agents much more productive and helping our restaurants. We are about to launch free-form search on the consumer side. So imagine, hey, I'm looking for a restaurant in Santa Monica that is kid-friendly but also has gluten-free options and is by, I don't know, the ocean, right? Like try doing that search on OpenTable right now. I guarantee you it's not going to work. But it should, right? Like that should exist because we have
Lord Fable after this session. Thank you so much. So we are in the business of connecting great stories with with stories that you like. So the exact problem you're talking about in the restaurant space, we do that in the content space, right? So how do we know Padma likes sci-fi, but she likes sci-fi with dragons and a happy ending? So how do I surface that exact book, that exact TV show for you to watch? So that's where we use AI. So it's more in the discovery and the connecting you to the community. It's not in the content creation. At least our company believes. We call ourselves a tech company with the soul of an artist. So I don't believe, actually, technology should replace human creativity. We should use technology to empower humans to create more and create better. And so we use AI, and we use a lot of AI to connect you to the right content for the discovery process. So how do we, not just genre-based searches, but really understanding the story is set in Paris, and I want to read a romance novel set in Paris, set in the 1920s, where there's a very strong female character in the story. So you can actually ask those sorts of questions on Fable to our AI agent called Scout, named after Scout Finch from To Kill a Mockingbird, and Scout answers your questions. And so that's sort of where we use it. We also use it for you to track, we call it utility features. So what you've read, keeping track of your activities is a very powerful way to use AI, right? Like, these are the books I liked. Why did I like them? These are the TV shows I didn't finish watching. Why did I not finish watching? So AI is actually great for that kind of a use case. You didn't like this TV show because maybe there was too much violence and that was not what you wanted. I think those sorts of tagging the reasons and tracking, as we call it, your progress of what you've read, the lists you've created, sharing those lists, discussing it. How do I find other people who are sci-fi fans that like dragon stories? It's like finding those interests. I think this is where AI can really, really play a huge role, not necessarily to displace humans writing those stories. That's not what we believe in, I believe in. Again, we separate Gen AI from AI. AI is broadly very useful because it's great at analyzing, looking for patterns, and serving those patterns, whether it's finding your travel or finding your restaurant or finding the great TV show or movie or book that you should read and consume. Gen AI is difficult. I think we did have some negative experiences with Gen AI, where Gen AI actually creates content, like I said, and when it creates content, there are biases built into it. And we got a lot of pushback from our users where we were using Gen AI to create summaries of you as a reader. Based on the books you've read, we would create a summary and say, hey, Padma, it's like this side of a person. But when we were using Gen AI, we stubbed our toe, and it actually turned out some content that was hurtful to some of our users. And I think the thing that to keep in mind is, especially when you're a consumer business with millions of users, even if there's one person hurt by a comment, it's sort of like the counter, right? You test it. Obviously, you have to test it a lot. We did 30 million summaries, and one summary had an issue. And so mathematically, you say that's a very good success rate. But the one bad summary was enough to hurt someone, and that has a negative effect. So if you're a global brand, you're a smaller company, you have to be really careful about that. I think the way to prevent that is making sure you have diverse teams testing these things. People from diverse backgrounds test, especially if you're global as a company. So I think a lot of testing, a lot of loopbacks is where we use it in the storytelling space, which I think applies to other businesses as well.
Well,
I
you
think,
brought-
oh, sorry, I was just going to say, I think that's a great point, and I think something brands really have to think about,
Yeah.
because customers come to your brand because they trust you. They trust you to deliver on something, and that can go away so very quickly that, when you have the technology excitement, you have to balance it with,
Absolutely.
what and how you've built that
Absolutely.
relationship
I think
with
that's
the
a very
customer.
important point.
Right, and that leads to my next question, and we can start with you, Leslie, about there's been a lot of talk about how AI and the algorithms that we use, even though they're human-generated, can be a bit impersonal, right, and take out that human touch. Travel is something that's very personal, and people have their preferences, people travel differently. How are you looking at technologies like AI, both Gen AI and AI, and making sure that a company like yours retains that human touch?
I think that's a great point, and I think it gets to a little bit of what I was saying earlier. We have to be very cautious that we're delivering something that's useful to the customer, and then to the point that you just made, that we're not delivering something that breaks that trust with the customer, right? They know and use our product for a reason, and so we have to be very cautious about how we start to apply. And we do everything through a test and learn lens. So we do a ton of A/B experimentation. So if we do have a new product idea, we will test it on a very small subset of our customer base, look at the reaction, and then gauge from there. And if it's not successful, go back to the drawing board. But we have to take that approach very cautiously versus just unleashing something because you risk alienating your customers or creating a product that they don't know or trust.
Debbie, same question for you. Nothing more personal than eating preferences, right?
Yes, it's true. I think of AI and Gen AI as ways to increase personalization, especially on the consumer diner front of our site. Like I said, we have a lot of information about your dining habits, right? We know that when you go out with girlfriends, it's a different type of meal than if you go out with your kids versus your mother-in-law, for example. And so we know all of those instances, but we're not stitching it together the way we should. So I actually think having AI working that and pulling the themes out, right? You have themes in dining as well, and then showing you restaurants that we think you could like. So for me, it's if we're using it properly, under the right guidelines, it should actually increase personalization because we're looking at your past dining behavior and places that you've rated highly, that you book a lot on, to then go and recommend new restaurants that you've never been to. So I view AI as helping the personalization effort that we're doing on our diner side.
I think there's a really important distinction here. I think I agree with Leslie. I think it's really, focusing on what are you really solving a problem versus just using technology for technology's sake. I think that's very important. I think that filter we have to apply. There's a distinction in all our businesses between recommendations and discovery. Recommendation is like knowing your behavior. I can recommend something for you, which is where AI is really good at. But discovery is those serendipitous things that happen to us as human beings. You're walking along, you see something in the window of a shop, perhaps, if there's still shops with windows. Maybe they won't exist someday. And you walk in because you like that, or you're in a bookstore and you're browsing and you pick up something. So I think discovery is something that we feel like AI has the next potential to really surface things for you that you haven't thought of, or you haven't read that author before, and you pick up, and because Fable recommends it, you pick that up. I think that's the next level of personalization. We call it hyper-personalization, really understanding not just your past behaviors, but anticipating things that you are going to like. And I think that's where there's a lot of potential, and it's a new area. I think in consumer business, that's going to be groundbreaking, to really figure out this hyper-personalization, which someday people believe actually it'll replace search. You won't be searching randomly anymore because technology really understands you. But you have to balance that with privacy, how much data you expose to get to that hyper-personalization. That's the balance you have to strike. At Fable, we work really hard to connect you with people who have similar tastes as you do, to discuss books that I read this great book right now. I want to talk about it. It's called All the Colors of the Dark. And so I have a group of people, I have a community on Fable that is also reading that book that wants to talk about that. It's sort of like that discovery of finding people who like similar things as you. And then when they suggest something, it's a real human making that recommendation. But I wouldn't have found that human without technology connecting me. So I think that's the balance we have to strike. Not necessarily to break human connections, but using technology to make real human connections with real people that like similar things, that offer a different perspective for you to gather from things that you've read, right? Because literature and stories are very subjective. Food is too, and places you visit are too. How I might react to a certain kind of food is different from how Debbie might react. So I think, how do we really get quantifiable information from these subjective experiences? This is, I think, the challenging part with AI, but also the exciting potential we have.
And I think two areas that we can look at, there's still a lack of equity when it comes to leadership roles for women in the tech industry. Bias is also another issue that all of you have brought up. So just really quick down the line, would like to ask each of you either lessons you've learned, in terms of the role that you're playing now, in making sure that, any application of AI or Gen AI is addressing the potential for inequity and bias, or solutions that you would like to see. Let's start with you, Leslie.
I would say maybe I'd frame it as a piece of advice from my own experience, which is, do not leave. This is game-changing technology. The way, the internet changed things, it touches everybody. This technology will touch everybody. So my advice would be, don't leave this to your CTO. Make sure in my own department, we have every department across our business is required to have objectives related to technology. So I think that's one way. We are already facing a gap in terms of women representation in technology, but this is now an opportunity for every woman, no matter where you work in your organization, to actually be at the forefront of technology.
Debbie?
I love that. Don't leave it to your CTO. That's so good. I was recently in a meeting or on a call with other CEOs. I was the only woman. And the discussion was like, well, what should each of us be doing in our business with AI and make sure we catch the wave and we're doing all the right things? And the group consensus was, well, we need someone in Silicon Valley who's connected and who knows what's going on. So maybe that guy or maybe this dude. And I'm sitting there and I'm gonna humble brag, okay? So like, I live in the Bay Area. I went to Stanford. I went to MIT. OpenTable is involved in almost every single AI launch. Like Sam Altman was playing around with Operator using OpenTable. And no one in the room thought to consider me. Now, that's on me. I also didn't raise my hand, right? But my point is, make sure that you're packaging and marketing yourself. That could be me. Now, that's not necessarily, I'm not saying I want to be that person that helps all these CEOs figure out Gen AI, but I at least want to be considered. And I feel like my qualifications or credentials at least should get me to be considered, right? But it did not, and these are men who respect me, who like me, who think I do a good job, but I'm not even in the thought of, perhaps this woman could help us with AI based on her location and her educational background and the type of company she runs, right? But it's not on them. Like, I actually view that that's on me, right? Like, I'm not raising my hand. I'm not positioning myself as a technologist because, like, yeah, I went to Stanford and MIT, but I was like a political science and business major, so I'm not, like hardcore like you. But I at least know enough and am connected enough to be able to like move the needle. But no one thought of me that way. And it wasn't even until that call where I was like, wow, like, I didn't even think of myself that way. And I should. So that's not on the men, that's on me. So like, just think about that. Like, I was like, this happened 2 weeks ago. I was like, wow, like, I got some like packaging, marketing work to do on myself, right? To make people think of me and not just like, oh, I'm a good girl that runs Open Table.
You are a good girl. You do run over.
You're more than that, Debbie. You're more than that.
That's awesome. Yeah, you should raise your hand next time. I'm going to call and check on you. Okay. I'm going to ask you. Did you raise your hand? Yeah, I mean, I'm a hardcore techie. I live in Silicon Valley. I've been in tech companies all my life. Technology is something we create as humans, and so it's going to carry all the biases we have inherently. There's a lot of racial bias. There's a lot of gender bias. As clean as models tend to be, there is a lot of bias inside the models because the data is biased. It's only the output is only as good as the input, right? And the input is contaminated, so the output will be contaminated. It's really as simple as that. It's not complicated. It's actually not technology. It's like common sense. I think as leaders, as women leaders, it's our responsibility at this stage, maybe at every stage in the evolution of technology, there is a human in the loop to test these things and test the output to make sure it's not spitting out bias inside the solutions that it's coming up with, especially with Gen AI. I think there is that risk. And I think it's on us to make sure we are challenging ourselves and our teams to make sure there is a diverse team, like I said, looking at this. I think human in the loop probably is a smart idea for businesses to have. In other words, if you're using AI for customer support or customer service, make sure there is a real human being checking those for now at least. And then have a diverse team developing those solutions. I think that's really important. I think to advise businesses on how to use AI, it's very complicated because each business is very different. I think if you have expertise in a particular kind of business, it's on us to make sure our businesses are not reflecting those biases in the output solutions. And if we are clean about it, and I think we can then speak to it. One of the things, we're a small company. We made a mistake with Gen AI. And actually, I went on Bloomberg and talked about the mistake we made so that we could help other entrepreneurs not make those same mistakes. I think that's the other thing. We should also share our failures with this technology because that's where the technology gets better. That's how it gets better. I think I actually feel women uniquely are better positioned for that because we are good at identifying things that break faster and fixing that. And maybe I'm biased in saying that, but that is a true statement. And so I think we're uniquely qualified to do that.
Okay, well, I could keep going, but Leslie, Debbie, Padma, thank you very much for sharing your insights, and it's clear we have a lot to look forward to.